Michael,
I'll
yes.
I'll ask another question. So I think it was around the week right after Christmas or right before Christmas, warm day. So I said, okay, I'll just, being a new beekeeper, I'll open up the tops and look inside. So I looked inside and, I could, before I even did that, I kind of hefted each one of them to kind of get a gauge of what they felt like for weight. And one of them definitely seemed lighter than what I would have expected. And even, I didn't pull out the scale, but when I opened up both of them, one of them clearly had many bees up towards the top and the other one did not. And would you expect that the colony may move up to the top?
Well, so I think a lot of us that have been around beekeeping for a while always sort of attached ourselves to this fictitious theory that bees winter, find this extraordinary way to go in the lower box and store a lot of honey above them. And now that is a technique that bees, or a behavior that bees illustrate in some fall periods, where if it's a big, strong flow, they don't have any place to store that honey. They store it above them in the colony. They normally always do that. And if it's a really strong flow, it'll force them down into the bottom box. But that's not always the case. They'll always leave the center open, by the way. They don't fill in, even though you'll hear this over and over from beekeepers telling you that there's a whole full super honey above the colony. Now, if that's the case, then then those bees will not be in the top super. They'll be in the bottom super. So if that colony ended up in that configuration where there's a really strong flow, and there wasn't this fall, or you fed them like crazy and they built up a whole top box, then they'll be below that and they'll work their way up through it. So yes, they will do that. They'll work their way up through it. They need empty cells to thermoregulate. They can't thermoregulate on honey. So yes, they eat their way up slowly. So that in that colony, you won't see bees on the top, but you would see them if you look down through the seams of the bees. You'd see them down there. And I don't suggest that you split the box in half, but if you did, you might see a cluster down in the bottom box. But all you would have to do to figure out if that colony was alive or not is just hold your hand over those top frames. And if you felt heat, you know that colony's alive, and close it again. Now, the one where the bees are on top, there's another mythology that we followed religiously through decades of learning about bees, is that, oh, if they're on top at this point, they're starving. Well, that's not the case. My bees winter on top all the time. And they actually winter under my insulated cover. So there's that too. So both of those scenarios can be fun.
Yeah, I insulated them like you had in your doc in that article, and they were up there. Like I said, one was up there, the other one wasn't. They both had activity out in front of the hive.
Yeah,
I know that both colonies were alive. The one where they were up towards the top, the reason why I bring this up is because that was the lighter box.
Yeah, and so your job there is to make sure that they have enough stores.
So I put a sugar cake in while I had it open.
Good enough. I mean, and hopefully they'll eat that. But my bees, live on the top all the time. Now they'll store, 40 or 50 pounds of honey in that top box, but they live on the top, and so it doesn't necessarily mean that your bees are going to die. But what you're saying is you observed two things. First of all, that other colony, hopefully you hefted that and it was heavy. The one where they're down. All right. And then you had a lighter colony that didn't store as much. And so now you're seeing that you don't see those bees yet in the heavy colony because they're probably still below the honey. Right. And then the one that's in the lighter box, they've maybe eaten all their stores. So you put some sugar cakes on. That's the right thing to do.
Right. I mean, it all lines up. I just wanted to talk about it and see,
No. It's a great example of how observational beekeeping has to work.
Right.
And that's how it has to work. It's not a formula. There's no prescription to it. Like, oh, I'm going to put sugar cakes on both colonies. Like old school beekeepers they would manipulate honey during the winter. They didn't feed. They brought frames of honey from stronger colonies to weaker ones, and then they would scratch the honeycomb to open it up a little bit so that there was some liquid honey so bees didn't have to get in there and uncap it, because they thought in their mind that they were helping bees by doing that. Who knows? But yeah, so it was always the manipulation of honey stores in your colonies that the old sort of practice of beekeeping is. But we have gone over, we shot right over emergency food and got right into doing both. There's the metaphor for it, I don't know what it is. Boots and straps or whatever they call that. We do.
Boots and, yeah.
What's that?
Belt and suspenders.
Belts and suspenders, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so we've gone right to belts and suspenders, and so people want to know, well, when do I put my sugar cakes on? Well, only when you need them, actually, is the answer, or never. If your colonies have a lot of honey. All right, so the closer you become to understanding that you're following the biology of those colonies around like an indentured servant, the better you become as a beekeeper.
Thank you.
Hey, Bill.
Hey, Bill, here's a question from earlier in the chat. Someone wants to know when to treat for mites in the spring, when to start feeding.
Well, there it is. I mean, that's you have to do exactly what we just talked about. Like you have to make sure you observe your colony. If it you don't necessarily have to ever feed in the spring. I never do. I don't feed in the spring unless I install a package somewhere, which I haven't done in quite a while. I have to feed that package, but I'm always coming through with enough stores to get me through March. That's the month I want to get through. And in my area, there's always enough forage around early enough to sustain my bees, assuming that they're flying at the end of February. So if you're a commercial beekeeper and you want to build your colonies up because you have a goal in mind, like pollination services or something else, then it's a completely different strategy. You're an industrial beekeeper at that point, and then you feed your bees on a schedule and you give them pollen and do all of that. And hopefully what you're doing at that point is stimulating brood. So there's lots of things that you can do if you feed early in the spring, if you have a reason to do that.
And the first part of that question was when to treat for mites in the spring.
Well, you don't treat for mites in the spring until you measure them and figure out if you need to. So I would, so we have a mite expert on the call. So Byron, how would you answer that question?
Well, the thing is that when bees come out of the winter after they've been, and they made it through the winter, the mite loads are very low.
They're low, yeah. Right.
Yeah, and as I mentioned before, that's not necessarily always true, but I never treat in the springtime. And I usually don't start testing the bees until I get into June. And the reason being that you're not going to find many anyway, because initially when they start brooding, and that'll happen when pollen starts coming in, the mites are all under the cappings and you can't see them. And a healthy colony with a good strong queen in it is going to outrace those mites, many times. And so the population stays relatively low. By the time we get to the height of summer, the bee population has reached its peak and it starts to decline. And that's when the mite loads are going to start to appear. Now, that said, it is possible if you had a colony that just made it through and was carrying a mite load, that mite load might get ahead of you. So if you don't have a lot, I run 150 colonies, so I don't have time to do all the testing, but it's not a bad idea if you want to get out in maybe April sometime when the populations have really grown. They've gone through their spring turnover and they've started to expand. You can do a wash on them and find out what it is. It's a great thing to learn.
Yeah, it's a great thing to learn. And that would be probably the earliest I would say I would recommend that you get out there and do that, because I totally agree that your mite count should be, if your colony survives and it had a minimum amount of varroa reproduction during the wintertime, your mite loads, your mite loads might stay low all season. You'll find that they'll be higher in the end. Yeah. Right. So again, no prescription for that. Stacy.
Hi, Bill.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. I'm just finishing up my first year, and just to give a quick background. I ended up buying 2 nukes out last May, and a couple weeks later, one of my colonies swarmed, and the phenomenal Jose came over. We live about a mile away from each other, and we actually captured that swarm, and I put it into a third hive. So that colony was weak. It never grew, but I still treated it the same as my other 2 stronger hives. I confirmed that the colony, there was no longer, it was completely done in mid-November. So what I did was I took the hive out, I took the boxes, and I grabbed the frames. So I actually took the frames, and I've read a lot, I've heard a lot from people. You can freeze it. You can use the resources for my colonies in the spring. I can reuse all that built up comb. And so I threw it in a clear bin, and I actually kept it outside because I feel like with our cold temperatures in the winter, it would be safe from wax moths or whatever. So I'm just trying to strategize what I'm going to do for the spring. Should I move that into my chest freezer that I keep in the garage to keep it from being infiltrated? And how would I allocate those resources to my other 2 hives if I need to? Or should I save them for a split that I haven't done yet? But I'm just curious.
Listen, you know, so you can do what you want with them. You can save them for a split. You don't have to worry about wax moths for a while. You do have to look at them right now to make certain that you actually did save them from wax moth damage. If they're outside now, those wax moths would be dead. But that doesn't mean that they didn't do some damage before they died. So go look at them and make sure that they're clean at this point. Then if you want to save them in any way, shape, or form, put them in your freezer. You
Okay.
know, once they're in your freezer, but if you can you fit them in your freezer in that container you have them in?
No, it's a smaller chest freezer. I could take them out. I don't think I can get all 10. It's a 10 deep frame, so I don't think I can fit them all at the same time.
So I have a couple of small ones also, but I can get a whole. You sure you can? So it's not like about 4 feet long or 3 feet long, and it's a
I'll
small.
I'll have to play some Tetris and see if I can manage it.
Yeah, maybe you can get it in there.
Okay.
So yeah, you got to freeze them though. You can keep them frozen. But it, if did you say there was honey in there?
There is honey in there.
Yeah.
But actually I don't know if I would call it honey. I wouldn't trust it as honey, maybe a food source, because they were a new colony. Everything was new. So I was feeding them throughout the
Oh, okay.
throughout the
All right.
summer.
Yeah. All right. So then you can put that in, if you find some colonies in the springtime or colony in the springtime that could use a little bit of a boost, put it in there. Put those honey frames in it. Don't put them in cold, try to get them in there, warm them up in your house and then put them in. And
Okay.
the ones you want to save, and yeah, you can split them. You can save them for a nuke too. If you want to make a nuke, this is your first year. If you want to make a split next year,
I'm excited to.
that would be a great thing for you to try. And then you want to save some of your frames for that. You'll need 5.
Okay.
All right. So
Great.
you have to save 5 for that. Right. Cool.
Hello, Bill.
Yes.
Yeah, a real quick question. What's the minimum temperature that you can open a hive at this point? I mean, at what level can you take a peek to see if the food stores are there and whatnot? I mean, does it have to be 50 degrees, 60 degrees?
Yeah, it's really good to have it 50 degrees. But it depends. You can do it lower temperature than that, but you got to make sure that there's a lot of sun out. You wouldn't want to do it on a cloudy day, but if it's real sunny, you can get in there and look. But you're not going to take this colony all apart at that point. You're better You're better off trying to heft it for weight. And you were better off sort of hefting it in the fall, so you got an idea of how much it weighed going in. And that could be in your notebook. Hive A was, felt like I could hardly lift it. You do some kind of a poetic explanation about it. Weighed as much as a flour sack or something. Who knows? But in other words, if you knew something about that colony going into the fall, you'd be in a much better position to be able to say something about it now based on how it felt when you lifted it. So this is always something that, again, so record keeping, I want to stress record keeping. Again, that it's important for you to do all the time. Nobody's going to do it for you, and you will forget what you just even saw. I had a, the way my memory works is I can go through 10 colonies, and I write at that point what I saw on the telescoping cover with a waterproof marker. So I actually will I have a shorthand code that I use, and then that's the way I can remember what's going on in that colony. Like, I might say heavy or something like that. So so in your case, that's basically how you can do it. So,
Okay, thank you.
all right. Now, Ralph, you had your hand up. What did you want to say?
I just wanted to add a piece to that previous discussion about when to test for mites.
Okay.
If you get a package and it would essentially, you've got no brood, so any mites that you have are migratory at that point. Sometimes people have taken to treating packages before they install them.
Yeah. So you wanted to add that about if you have a package, it's a good opportunity for you to treat for mites.
Right.
Yeah, and what you would do there is you would follow the label recommendation. The label will walk you through how to actually treat a package of bees. It's a little different. And what you don't want to do is spray an oxalic acid treatment on a package of hungry bees because they consume it. So what the recommendation on the label for feeding packages is to feed them amply first with a sugar water solution and no oxalic acid. If you want them to get their honey stomachs kind of full with sugar syrup that you spray on them through the screen, and then you can actually spray them with the oxalic acid and sugar solution. All right, so that's the way you can do it. And
I've also used HopGuard too when I installed the package.
yeah, you can use HopGuard when you install a package. I like to make sure that if I vaporize, usually the question is, when can I vaporize a new package of bees? That's another question that people ask. And when I talk about vaporization, I'm talking about, sublimating oxalic acid in a device that heats up the acid, turns it into a vapor, and then it goes throughout the colony. So a lot of folks want to know, well, when can I use that on a new package? Well, that I usually make sure that my queen is out and laying first. And I also make sure that I try to catch her before there's any capped brood, and then fumigate it or sublimate it or vaporize it, however you want to say it, vaporize the oxalic acid when the queen's laying, but before there's any capped brood. Right, so you have to be very vigilant. You make sure your colony in your package that your queen is released. She's out on the comb. She's laying, and then as soon as that occurs, that colony has been established. The brood's been established, and the colony is not likely to abscond if you spray a bunch of junk inside of them. Right, so that's why I wait until the queen's laying, because I know a couple things. Then I got a good queen, and I got a colony that's going to stay with that brood. Right. So
Bill, what if you pull the queen cage and do the package? Put the queen aside in the cage.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have any way to vaporize them unless you put them in a box.
Yeah.
You would have to make a special box then to vaporize packages. I know long before oxalic acid was legal in the United States, some folks used to have warehouse space in New York City where they would bring packages in and spray them with oxalic acid, lay them on their side. In Germany, they do the same thing. They will take their packaged bees that they shake, and they'll put them in a dark, cool room, and they'll spray them and lay them on their side. So they can see and on a white sheet, and see how many varroa come out of them that way. So there's a number of different ways to do it. But in order, you're on to a question that I often thought about trying to figure out how to do, Ralph, which would mean that it would be a package box. So you'd have to have a box, you put a package in it, and then had a hole in it somewhere where you could shoot oxalic acid in. But of course, that's off-label use. And that would be illegal, but you could do it anyway. I think we're going to see some. By the way, this is a prediction you heard first here in Bee Talks. I was partially involved in a test of a product out of Argentina called alum cap, which is a saturated thin sheet of cardboard. That's what's a paper, a heavy kind of paper, has a combination of glycol on oxalic acid, and it's a slow release miticide, and it was tested by the USDA. This past bee season, I was involved in the study in the beginning, and I just the results I think are out, and I think it's very good. So I'm thinking that it's possible that we'll see a very interesting miticide available in the United States very shortly, maybe next season, maybe the season afterward. You know, the government doesn't move very quickly, as you might know, and sometimes they're not that efficient. But the testing piece was done, and it went very well. I understand from that. I was contact with one of the lead researchers 2 days ago, so I'm really encouraged with that. And while we're on the subject, I don't want to forget this, Jose. We'll advertise a little bit at the end of this about our guest speaker lineup that's coming up in this year. It starts next month, and if you could get it, and we could talk about those speakers before we leave. Okay, yeah, HopGuard, yeah, is a HopGuard is a beta acid that is used. It's derived from a plant source, hops, and it has sort of a not the best start in the world, and they reformulated it. And I have not used a reformulated HopGuard. I didn't have good results with it. I know my friend out west, Randy Oliver, is also tested HopGuard and didn't get as robust a varroa kill as he wanted.
I actually used it too, and it didn't do anything.
Yeah, and so
I bought 3 packages of it. I used it. I tested. I washed the mites. I sent one of the last packages back. Got my money back.
yeah.
That was HopGuard 2. I don't know if
Yeah.
they've changed it.
No,
this or not.
that's HopGuard too, and that's the one, because there were corrugated strips.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
it was kind of messy to work with.
Yeah, it's messy to work with. It's harmless, you know. It's beta acids are put in hot dogs. It's an antimicrobial, you know. So you've been eating beta acid for all of your life. You may not know it. It's in preserved meats, and they use it in the food industry all the time. So it's not that it's that harmful, but it's just not that effective. And I think what we discovered is that if the larger the colony is, and the healthier the colonies, or the larger population of bees, because it's a dispersal varroicide, it has to be carried around the colony. So in a big colony, it doesn't happen as much. So in a small, I don't even know what the ideal size would be. So I think, in my opinion, the jury's out on HopGuard, but other people, if you have success with it, great.
Yeah, so about HopGuard, like, I don't know, I haven't talked about this in Bee Talks because it was so like awful. I had an unbelievable mite infestation in the fall. Like, I can't even, at one point, honestly, I thought I had American foul brood. I bought the kits. I called Mark Crichton. I had like, I don't know, I've heard you talk before about like mite loads. And once my first year, you asked me if when I had the drop, if everything was red, and my mite board was red. So I didn't know what you're talking about. It was like literally a red piece of plastic. Out of control. And everything I did last year was the same as every other year, except in the spring, I didn't use HopGuard. I've used HopGuard, even though like I didn't really think it did anything. So I didn't use it this past year. That's the only thing that I did differently. I've never lost a colony, and which is ridiculous, I know, but I never have. And I can't imagine the viral loads. I had deformed wing virus. I did not have any sort of foul brood. Let me be very clear. I was inspected, but that's how bad it was. That's what I was worried about. So I don't know. I'm using HopGuard this year.
Okay, good. I mean, you haven't lost any colonies yet. That's the excellent tutelage you've had over the years.
No, there is no doubt about that. There isn't. And in all honesty, my very first year, this guy, his name is, I think, Ray Salva. He's a beekeeper. I don't think he comes
Yeah.
to Beetle. He gave me 2 broods of frame, and that's why that colony survived. But I will mention this because I had heard that first winter after that, my one and only colony had only sort of survived, to give brood. I had bought a new package, and that was taking off. And somebody said, give the weak colony a frame of brood.
Yeah.
And what I didn't know, and I always want to tell this to new beekeepers coming out of their first winter,
Good.
that includes the nurse bees. I didn't know that. I literally very carefully just gave them eggs, which that weak hive immediately cannibalized.
Yes.
So that was a lost, resource. So if you're coming out of winter and you start a new colony, or you have 1 weak and 1 strong, and they say, give some brood, that includes the nurse bees.
Yeah, that includes the nurse bees, but I like the way you did it because, now, so you observe the actual consequences of your action.
Yes.
And you
Yep.
have never forgotten that
Nope.
you got to include the nurse bees. All
Yes.
right. So what Lauren's talking about is, you have to, if you find a colony that needs a little lift, and you decide that you have a really strong colony, decide, well, maybe I can give, I'll use this as a donor colony. Like I have 5 or 6 nucleus colonies in my yard that are still alive and flying really well in this hot weather. Those are my donor colonies. And if I find something that needs a queen or needs some brood in the springtime, I'll use those colonies, nucleus colonies, to provide the resources for a weaker colony, or one that I want to save, or whatever I want to do with them. And so when you take if you take the brood out to give it to another colony, and that's a weaker colony, and you shake all the bees off of it and you put the brood in there, well, they can't take care of it. So they need the nurse bees to actually help them. And nurse bees can go into almost any colony without any objection they're like little gifts to a colony, nurse bees are. Now, foragers and guard bees and all that are not gifts to a colony. And if you get if you mix a field force up, it's not going to be good, right? The bees will fight. But nurse bees, they are, the receiving colony says, come on in, and they will be fine there. They'll say, good, this is our new home. And they'll start raising that brood. And then any bee that comes to that colony also that bears any kind of gift will be allowed in, including pollen or nectar. Some bees don't refuse gifts. All right. So
Hey, Bill?
yeah.
I have a spacing question, probably real basic. I have 2 hives now, and they're spaced approximately almost 8 feet apart. I was planning on adding 2 more hives in the spring. Is there enough room between these things to put 2 hives in between them? I mean, I don't know what the spacing requirements of putting hives next to each other, but they're about 8 feet apart. Can I get 2 hives in between there safely?
Yes, you can.
Spacing?
Yep. Yeah, you can put 2 hives and you can put them side by side.
Okay.
They can be touching. Now, there's another question, right? Is that the best way to do it?
No.
So
I know
so the
they're
answer
saying-
to your question is yes, you can. And, you got to look at commercial, industrial beekeepers will jam their bees against each other in 4x4s and on skids and all of that kind of stuff. So and bees have a real propensity to be able to find their colony, but there'll be a lot of drifting that way. There'll be a lot of other, I think there's a lot of negative side to that. So you should try to give your bees as much space as possible, even more than 8 feet, orient their entrances in different directions so that so you minimize the amount of drifting that occurs. The most ideal apiary location And arrangement will be discussed this coming Saturday in our next bee school. And you'll be able to hear a lot more about that. And yeah, so the best way is that if you were standing in the center of your apiary, all of the bees around you would be in this sort of like pattern where there's one facing south, one facing the entrance I'm talking about now, east, west, and so on and so forth, so that your bees are like flying in these little quads out in different directions and coming back. and
Right.
finding
So
stuff.
the entrance can face other than south. I was
Yeah,
always any,
yeah.
Oh, you can.
Yes,
okay.
yeah, I have really successful hives that that face dead north.
Oh, okay.
So-
So it's
Yeah.
feasible. I could do it by just changing the entrance position on those two hives. If I was to stick two hives in between that 8-foot situation.
Well,
put
yeah, you
one
could,
north.
yeah,
yeah.
that makes your bee yard a mess. So in
Oh.
other words, yeah, so now you can never work on bees because you're always standing in a flight path.
Oh, yeah,
You
okay.
definitely don't want to do that. So
Okay.
so that's why I was saying if you stand in the center of your colony arrangement, the bees are flying out in different directions, but none of them are flying in toward you.
Okay.
All right, so
Got it.
yeah, so yeah,
Yeah.
it just makes it really difficult to work bees. Every once in a while, I'll get in a situation where I have a colony that's the entrance is flipped for some reason or another, and then I have to run the whole season with that colony facing in the wrong direction, and I'm always banging into bees. And so so during the season, you got to keep shifting it. Bees don't do well when you move their entrance in, like just turn the colony. They don't do well in that situation. They do better if you move them in either away or toward their flight path. That's when they can be
Okay.
manipulated more easily.
Carol
Thank you.
has a question.
Yeah.
Carol,
Yeah, I pull my Coroplast monitoring board just about once a week. It also serves as a great observational tool for me.
Yeah.
And I pulled it this afternoon. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
And I was really distressed, as I have been often when I pull it. It is just loaded with mites. And I'd like to mention that I am observational, Bill.
Mhm.
So that's one of the reasons I pull the board. But if you take a look at my treatment chronology,
Yeah.
back on 10/3, I did 53 days of the Apivar strips.
Yeah.
I pulled the Apivar, and at Thanksgiving, I added I did an OA dribble. Prior to that, and I'm going to give a shout out to Jose, who is my awesome mentor as well. We did oxalic acid vapor. My question is, so far, none of my treatments have addressed any of the bees that would be in capped brood. Everything has been phoretic. So I'm wondering if at some point, this is probably a learning thing for me because I have a terrible feeling I'm going to lose these bees, if I should have used something like a Formic Pro.
Well, I mean, that may be
What
the
would-
case. So
So,
yeah, so here's the thing with beekeeping. If you find that you're doing something that's always causing you a lot of stress, don't do it anymore.
well, it's not causing me stress.
Don't do it anymore.
It's my first
Beekeeping
year.
is supposed to have fun. Now, have you ever taken that board out
Yes.
and cleaned
Oh,
it?
God. Yes. Oh,
Okay,
well, hear
so
me
these
out,
are
Bill.
mites that have fallen from when?
A week. Within a week, I clean it out once a week.
And it's still red with mites.
It still had, it's not, yes, I'm really good at recognizing mites now, let me tell you.
Well, I mean, are you talking about thousands of mites
I'm
or,
talking 50.
50?
Yeah.
Oh. Well, I wish I had the mite board that I used to bring to class. Where
no, I'm
mites
telling you, I
were
mean, I look
stacked
at
up
it-
on each other. I don't think 50 mites, I'd be too concerned about 50 mites because mites die during the winter. But here's the test with this, Carol. You're gonna have to, if that colony's alive in the spring, that's gonna be the test.
So just be
Yeah,
patient.
you got to be patient with it, and really, I mean, it's beekeeping, and you know what you did. You did a lot to try to mitigate your mite load.
Well,
And-
could I mention something else that has been a concern to me? Out here, there's a very dense population of beekeepers. Within 2 miles, as the bee flies, is a very large commercial apiary.
Yeah,
And right in my neighborhood are many hobbyist beekeepers. Some are, I hate to use the word neglectful because I know them personally. Some might just be inexperienced, but I wonder if some of my mite issues could be from their bees coming over and messing around with my bees.
well, it's the middle of the winter. I mean, it's not likely
No,
happening.
prior to the middle of the winter.
Well, sure. Well, you have no, yeah, the only way you would know that is to do your mite rolls, then you would know. Did
So
you
what
have-
advice would you give me? Just be patient and continue to still have fun, which I'm
Yeah.
doing, by the way. It's the
You-
learning process. We
Yeah,
learn by
you
our
gotta-
failures.
You got to have
Right?
fun. Right. No, but you have records, you have your
I
mite.
keep copious records.
Great. I mean, you're going to be a great beekeeper.
Ta-da, ta-da.
Yeah, see there you go. So make sure so if that management technique that you use, beekeeping is not something you can learn overnight or right away or in one season or two or maybe even three. You have to have lots of experience with bees before you get to a point where you're a little bit less concerned than you are now. So I understand.
Learning by our failures, right,
that kind of
Bill?
concern. Well, no, well,
And our
yeah,
successes.
so both, but so it's going to take some of you to go back and take a look at that. And then there's also a number of other things involved in, the variables that occur in a given year around how your colony reacts to its mite load, and all of that can change. So it's going to take a while, but I think you did a fairly good job at your mite.
Yeah, there's no failure yet.
No, there's no
Thanks,
failure.
Hazel. Thank you, Jose.
Yeah, there's no failure, right? I mean,
No,
all right.
Bill,
that's
So,
good to hear.
so what,
Thank you.
Lauren,
Can
did you
I-
have another question? 'Cause
yeah,
you-
I wanted to comment for Carol. I also used
Thank you.
I also used Apivar in the fall, although I know that Bill doesn't like it, and I know that Bill said that there had been resistance, but I've like always tried to be really aggressive with mites. And when I had that when I tell you that I had a mite explosion, it was unbelievable. And it was 4 weeks into Apivar. And I had Mark Creighton come, and he told me to remove the Apivar and do Formic Pro. And I had done Formic Pro there was 3 days below 80 it was either late July or early August, and I did the Formic Pro. And then I was doing the Apivar as like routine. I'd been monitoring mites, but I was going to do the Apivar. It didn't matter what the count was. I was doing Apivar. And because of the conversation we had, Bill, about maybe the mite loads are because of insufficient, like the testing isn't really telling us what we need to, because maybe they're not being shaken adequately. Do you remember that?
Yes.
bee talk
Oh,
stuff?
yeah.
So I
mean,
was treating anyway, and I did the Apivar, and it was 4 weeks into that when I tell you that I had a mite explosion. So I pulled them all. I did the Formic Pro. All 7 are still alive. I don't really think I'm going to make the whole way because I know the viral loads were terrible. But
oh, you had them tested?
I mean, I saw.
It's an assumption, right? You're assuming that the viral load was high, but maybe it wasn't.
The deformed wing virus.
Oh, yeah.
The
Yeah, you had
deformed wing
signs of it.
virus.
Yeah.
I was pulling mites with tweezers off of bees, which is ridiculous, but that's what I was doing. The thing that made me think, like, God forbid, American foul brood, there wasn't a smell, but there was
Parasitic mite syndrome. Yeah.
it was parasitic mite syndrome,
Yeah.
but 4 weeks into Apivar. So
Yeah. Well, now, so I'm connected to folks that discuss in private what a lot of the commercial beekeepers are up against with Apivar at this point. And so Apivar is in some instances still working. And now this is not surprising to me. And in other areas is failing. But the commercial beekeepers are using Apivar at a rate about 9 times the intensity that you were. So in other words, they've gone to the point where they used to be able to use Apivar. Now, what we're talking about now, we want to make sure we're talking about Apivar, like people, there's a lot of APAs out there. There's Apistan, Apiguard, there's thymol products that start with APA. We're talking about the neurotoxin, Apivar. So Apivar is losing its efficacy to the extent that, folks are questioning it on the commercial side of stuff. So it's not new that Apivar has resistance. It had it before. And this is like, 20 years ago, Apivar was a pesticide that was a miticide that was then taken off the market. And then, to my surprise, was reintroduced in the last 10 years. I can't remember exactly when. And I wondered, well, why would they do that? I mean, if we've already experienced the fact that Apivar, bees get resistance to Apivar, but it was a tool that folks had in the background, and they said, well, I haven't used it for a decade and we haven't used it in the United States for a very long time. Let's try it again. So, and it doesn't surprise me that that the resistance builds up in fits and starts. In other words, there will be, a bee that has a genome that will resist Apivar, and then there's other populations of bees that we have in our country where Apivar will still work, and it might still work for you in one of your colonies, but you may not. We may start to get resistance in every bee that we have. So, I mean, other products that we have done.
Yeah, Bill, I think
Yeah.
I think maybe you're confusing Apistan, no?
Yeah. See, if people are talking about Apistan or Apiguard, the thymol products, then we're talking
Yeah,
about.
so there's the tactic one that is
That's Apivar.
Apivar,
yeah.
and that one was originally made for ticks on cattle in livestock.
Yes,
But
but it was.
But Apistan was a miticide that was used in agriculture.
Yes.
And they got resistant to that probably
Right away. Yeah.
They got right away. And then
Yeah.
some beekeepers 10 years later brought it back, or 15 or 20 years later, and they found some efficacy, but the mites quickly moved through it again.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, so
Apivar actually has had a really long run. It's probably, I don't know, they used it in Europe for years.
Oh yeah, no, but I don't. It doesn't seem like it's holding on to its efficacy. We'll see.
I think that's finally getting worn out, and
Yeah.
maybe that's what happened to you. You just put in you got your resistance in the mites, and you put your Apivar
Yeah.
there in, and it didn't do anything.
It didn't work, right?
Yeah.
So but Formic Pro is a different kind of miticide. It's an organic acid, but it can be difficult on queens. It's actually not the formic acid that kills queens, it's the colony that kills them. So for some reason they blame the queen when they get a bunch of formic acid on them. That's why I like to go. I use formic and oxalic acid, and I sort of use the both of them, and I use them for different reasons and different times of year and so on. So if I got a lot of brood and I want to control the mites, I use formic acid. If I don't have brood, or I can make a colony broodless, or I find a colony broodless, I'll use oxalic acid on it, because I know that its efficacy is highest when there's no brood. Even though folks want to experiment with it and do multiple applications, and there's folks in Maine and out in California that swear by this every 7 days, every 5 days, and you can do it that way, and you could get good control, but you have to make sure you're monitoring that and making sure that it works. But I use it when it's broodless, when the colony's broodless. Otherwise, I use formic acid. And the downside for Apivar is, as Lauren knows, but I'll say it anyway, is that it builds up in the comb. Whereas the other two organic acids won't build in the comb. The metabolites build in the comb also. So it's not just Apivar, there's a couple of metabolites. So as a product of any kind of a molecule finds its way through the environment, it's broken down, it oxidizes and it's broken down. And Apivar breaks down into they call them metabolites because it's like metabolism that's digesting the actual molecule, and the metabolites are present in the comb and have some residual toxicity. Yeah, Apivar is Amatraz. Thank you, Ralph.
Yeah.
All right.
And just as a side note, I only use Formic Pro.
Yeah, that's all you use. Yeah, you don't.
Yeah, that's
well,
all I use.
yeah.
And the key to it is you treat and then test,
Yeah,
because it doesn't always work to drive the load down far enough. And then you treat, if they don't, I treat them again.
Yeah.
And I only put them on for a week. I put them on for a week. I go back in, I test. If they not low enough, I treat them again.
yeah.
And the
And-
larger the colony, the more resistance there is in getting, or more trouble there is in getting that mite load down.
Right. And the opportunity for oxalic acid, if you have my philosophy, or that you should use it when the colony's broodless, the opportunity for that is much rarer than than when the colonies almost always have brood. So it's formic acid is usually the default varroa treatment I use, also only because the circumstances are that the colony, when I want to treat, the colony mostly has brood. But I do watch my queens after that, and I'm sure you do too.
One thing about using formic acid is that you have to be aware that the mite drop will continue based on the brood that's hatching out with dead mites on it. So that's
Right.
a kind of a specious number. You
Yeah.
have to give that a lag period there to adjust your count to actually see what you.
Well, by the end of 3 days, you have a hard drop. You have a big drop with formic acid, and then it carries out for the next 10 days. For easily the next 10 days, it'll kill mites. Because it's a 10-day treatment. Byron's using it for 7, and he's doing tests, so he's doing something different. But you can, there's a couple different ways you can apply formic acid on the label, and then that's what you have to follow, and so it kills mites for a very long time. So somebody, Petgrave.
That's Antonio again. Let's see if he's got his microphone working. Antonio.
Can you hear me?
See
there
that?
you
We
go.
knew you were going to do that.
Yes.
We
All right,
knew you were
awesome.
gonna-
So I got a question. I have a hive going into its second winter, and the first winter, there was a lot of bee drop, and I was concerned. It's the bee drop was significant to the point where when I cleaned the bottom board, they'd clump onto the floor, and same setup as my other hives this year. So let me go back. So last winter, I kept poking around with this hive, kept trying different things, open, close, entrance. Is it a moisture issue? I got brood minders to monitor the temperatures and the humidity. I could have swore that spring came, there was a frame and a half of bees. I transferred them into a nuke. They built up, and they were probably like my second to third producing hive as far as stores. This winter, I'm having the same issue with this particular hive. I clean out the bottom board, same thing, clump of bees. Mite count this year was good. Last year, it was the highest mite count I got on that hive was 5. This year, the highest I got on was 2. My question to you is this like a common trait, or is there something I should look more into as far as like if there's a viral load or something that is causing this particular hive with similar setup than the other hives to act this way?
No, so by no, I mean that you have to, so the first year you couldn't kill the colony. That's what you're trying to say, even though you did
Correct. I was
all that.
poking in and out of it.
You tried to kill that colony, but it wouldn't die. I mean,
I took it apart. The bees came up. I closed it. I'm like, I can't believe they're alive.
Yeah, so
Left
you
them
tried to
alone.
kill them. So they stayed alive instead, in spite of you. Then they built up really strong coming back. And then and now, did you do anything this year before they went into fall to control the varroa, or no?
So yes, the only thing I didn't do this year is I didn't treat with formic. just because my first year, my hives replaced all the queens the first year on Formic. So what I did was strictly oxalic, and I did try the HopGuard 3. I can't really go off the mite counts. It didn't seem like there was much of a improvement, but again, the mite loads this year were really good. And I think that's probably because they're bred with local genetics. That's my guess.
Nah, so we really can't tell, but you're going to tell us, what occurred in this colony and if it comes through the spring. So is it genetic that it's building, that it's surviving with really low populations and then it's building up again? Is it mite related? If it's really mite related and it snuck into, because you really have to look at your mite loads in October. And if you didn't do that, you might have been really surprised.
Yeah, and I don't.
Yeah.
Come October, I don't mess with them. I try to do everything by September. The one thing I could tell you about this one hive is that they had a lot of honey stores to the point where there was no room for the queen to lay. I was worried about her swarming, but it was late in the season. Their stores are full, no brood at all. The last time I peeked into this particular hive. So this is the characteristics it's having.
All right. Well, so follow, you got to follow it and see what occurs. See if that queen comes through this year. It's the same queen, right? They didn't.
It is the same queen because she, like I said, I transferred into a 5-frame nuke and they build back up really fast. It's kind of like, I did a little bit of research and they kind of seem like they're kind of like Russian-y. I'm not sure. It is a darker bee. It's really dark bee as far as the color, but they seem like they want to die and they don't die. I don't get it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, don't worry, you'll kill them. It'll just take you a little longer. Yeah. So back to just before we answer these other questions that we have going here, I want to get back to, I'm just going to mention, because Antonio brought up the subject about color, and I'd like you to all understand that the color of your bee has nothing to do with its ancestral heritage. It's the easiest thing for bee breeders to breed, and color has, you can find darker, we have in our country bee stock, basically. And if you look at the genetics, and we have looked at the genetics in detail of the entire bee population in the United States, and what everyone who has done it, and this has been validated over and over and over by detailed PCR analysis and mitochondrial analysis, and all ways we can tell what the ancestral heritages of bees are. They are about a 50-50 mix of Carniolan and Italian. So almost every bee, unless you purchase a specially bred bee that has a pedigree line that comes in. There are some breeders that do have these specialized breed, but mostly those are bred for Varroa hygienics, and some of the Russian lines are if you buy a Russian bee that's been bred by the Russian Bee Breeders Association, you're likely to get a Russian bee in that case. But for the most part, the bees that we get normally in packages and all of that are just bee stock. So, and don't weigh too much on color. That's all I want to say. And don't pay anymore for a bee that's a darker color either. Like they're going to give you a Carniolan, unless you can get a certificate that says that bee's a Carniolan from someplace. Like we can say anything we want about bees. It doesn't necessarily make it true unless you know the breeder. That's why we have Byron here today. We know this breeder, so we can trust what he says about his bee. All right, let's go.
Hey, Bill.
Yes, Santo.
Hey, Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year, Santo. What are you doing over here? What are you doing? What are you doing?
I had pastry today, Jose.
I told you
I know it's for a reason.
I knew. I told you. Santo, I told you have Vinsanto with that. You wanted to go with a little bit of cannoli and some kind of like a little cappuccino. I said, get this Vinsanto out. What are you doing?
And listen, can you take the last few minutes to talk about hive beetles?
Hive beetles, sure we can. Yeah. I don't know where we are with we do have some questions about robbing and all of that. Well, we might not get to that this season, but small hive beetles have this interesting way of surviving the winter. They'll do that in your colonies. The bees will keep them alive. Actually, they jail them in, or at this point, if there are small hive beetles in your colony, and there probably are, or there could be, I know there are in mine. They will be on the peripheral of the bee nest, bee cluster. They keep warm there, and they're fed. They will antennae they use their antennas, and they massage the mantles of nurse bees, and bees will give them a little bit of food, keep them alive over the wintertime. So you don't have to worry about your small hive beetles. They'll be there in the spring for you, waiting, and they have this interesting sort of life cycle where now that during the winter, the fertile female small hive beetles will not be laying. They will begin to lay eggs sometime in the spring if they're allowed the opportunity to do so by the bees in that colony. In other words, if it's a strong colony, comes out of winter strong, not likely that they'll let the queen, the fertile female small hive beetle, it's not likely they'll let her lay. All right, but if they do, then what will occur is they will get the eggs will hatch, and then you'll have larvae, and the larvae will find their way through every element in the colony. So they'll eat through wax, they'll eat larvae, they'll eat, they love protein patties. So if anybody puts a pollen patty on top of their colony in the spring to feed it, and they find that they could possibly be feeding on a population of small hive beetles, you have to be very careful. And then the larvae get to a point where they go into this stage called wandering, where they drop out of the colony. So they can't actually pupate and go into their adult stage. They go through the same metamorphosis as any insect that goes through full metamorphosis. So it's egg, larva, pupa, and then adult. But the pupa and the adult cycle takes place outside the colony, right? So they get to this point where they have to migrate out of the colony. And now sometimes if you have small hive beetles that have been allowed to lay eggs in the periphery of your hive, it's not really a problem for you, or they'll lay it on a really dirty or a drop board that has a lot of detritus on it that you haven't taken out. In the summertime, you'll find small hive beetle larvae in there sometimes because they'll lay eggs in there. And then the larvae crawl out of the colony. If it's a screen bottom board, they just drop right down below the colony. They burrow their way down into the ground a couple centimeters, 5, 6, 7, 8 centimeters, I can't remember. And then 14 days later, they might come out of the ground as an adult. All right, so it's egg laying in the colony, and then the larvae are fed not by small hive beetles, but by everything that's in the colony. If there's a large population of small hive beetles, they'll slime the colony, they'll ruin it, and the bees will abscond, and that colony will be useless to you. If it's a smaller population of small hive beetles that the bees can keep in check, they may still produce a couple of larvae that actually reproduce in the soil below your colony, right? So the best way for you to control small hive beetle is to be proactive. If you see even a single beetle in your colony, try a few things to get rid of them. One is a beetle trap. You can look through the bee catalogs and get these little beetle blaster traps that you put inside the colony. There's oil in them. I don't quite like those because they're a little messy, and you can spill the oil in the colony if you do that. Bees do not do well with oil on them. They die, as a matter of fact. But you can also use a dryer sheet you can put in the corner of your colonies. And what occurs inside of a colony with small hive beetles, bees will chase them around. They don't want them in there either. They'll chase them around, and they'll chase the bees. The small hive beetles are around. They chase them, and they take refuge in the edges of the colony, small hive beetles. And if they finally find a dryer sheet, they get tangled in it and they stay there. So some people have luck with them. I have 10,000 of them in a big box that I bought for the folks in Bee Talks the month before we ended our meetings. So I still have them, and at some point we will celebrate with cannolis from Vincento and copious amounts of alcohol or something, and I'll pass out all of those dryer sheets for everybody. But then them you put in the corner. So you have to mitigate them as soon as you find them to keep the populations down. So they will winter in your colony. They will migrate to your colony. They can fly. What they do is they defecate in the colony. That defecation ferments in the colony and gives off a pheromone-like odor, which attracts more small hive beetles to that colony. So they have a way of actually signaling other small hive beetles in the area that there's a colony here that we can take advantage of. So because when the larvae begin to defecate, there's a byproduct, that a pheromone product that, or it's more appropriate to call it a VOC, that will attract other small hive beetles to that colony. They fly at night, in the evening, fly during the day. They're not good flyers. Let me show you a small hive beetle I got in Africa. Well, it's not actually a small hive beetle. It's a large hive beetle. Can you see that in there? The size of that beetle. I mean, that's as big as it actually looks in that jar. So that's what they have in Africa. So we should be lucky that we only have that small hive beetle. Anyway, did that answer your question?
Yes, yes,
All
yes,
right.
Bill.
Can I propose something?
Sure.
So I tried something, I read a lot of stuff and, YouTube and Pinterest and all that.
Say Facebook too. Sly.
Facebook.
Yeah, Facebook too. Yes, yes. You guys, everybody can
He had to
choose.
say Facebook. He had to
I
say Facebook. Go ahead.
Okay. So someone suggested putting ash
Uh-oh.
from like your fireplace under there.
Yeah.
I had hive beetle problems, and I've seemed to have been doing pretty good the last couple of years.
Under where?
Under the hives. So I have hive stands that are 4x4s, and I have lots of room underneath my hives. So I've been spreading this ash under there for the last couple of years. And the other thing I do is I grow mint around my hives, which I heard was something else. It also smells pretty cool when you step on it. But it seems that there might be something to that. My hive beetles have not been too bad this last couple of years, unless there's other things going on.
Yeah, they weren't too bad the last couple of years for us that, didn't do that. But but I'm not sure that I read any. I have no. There's no science that supports the ash piece. So, but you can try it. But in other words, what you're trying to block, I think, is the larva from migrating down into the soil. And so where people have their colonies on asphalt and cement pads, a small hive beetle larva that's in the wandering stage will go 100 yards till it finds soil that it can go into. So I mean that we know. That I had a small hive beetle problem in one of my honey supers that I brought into my honey house one year. And and unfortunately, I didn't see that there were small hive beetles in that honey super. Larvae, not beetles, there were larvae in it. And I put it on the top of a stack of honey supers that I was about to extract. So I had about 5 or 6 honey supers under it, filled with honey. And then, so I pulled that and I saw the larva, and I made every mistake in the book at that point. I started pulling frames, and I started banging the box on stuff and to try to get the larva out of them. They were crawling all over my honey house floor. I mean, and so it's pretty big too. It's like 24 by 24 or something. And I tried to sweep them up with a broom, push them out with a squeegee. And, and then of course I put a lot of other small hive beetle larvae in the rest of those supers that were below it, because the first thing I did was pull frames over the top of those stack of supers. So, and then, so I swept them out of the garage, and I have a little cement apron. And then there's this little spot after the cement apron where the asphalt driveway starts, and there's a little, 1/4-inch gap there. And so I swept them down into that little gap by accident. Who knew? And, I thought I got rid of them, and I was really proud of myself. And then 14 days later, I saw some more hound beetles coming out of that little crack between the garage. So they are really tenacious. So let's talk about.
Can I add a little bit more, Bill?
Well, yeah, you can. Okay, well, we're
so-
keeping people up late. So we have to.
In line with what Jose said with the mint, I use mint and I use sage, and on top between the top board and the cover, I put a roll of cinnamon sticks. And,
Yeah,
and
you know
it's-
what? If you put a shot of vodka on top of that cone, you can make a nice little drink out of that. I knew there was something. I knew there was
some
something.
happy bees.
Well, listen, thank you so much for coming to Bee Talks tonight, but we're going to wrap it up. But before we do, I want to make sure that there's people that still, if you haven't registered for a bee school, now we have over 150 students this year. And we had a very nice session last weekend, and I expect that we're going to have a good session this year, because this coming week, because we have Steve Dismore is going to come and talk about hive location. He's our ex officio. And then Randy Oliver is going to give his talk on installing packages and what to expect after you install the packages. So we have some really interesting beekeepers that we have in our school this year. So if you haven't registered and you want to, you still have time to register for this weekend. And of course, that would come with the next 2 weekends that follow this one. So you're still right in the beginning of the course if you wanted to do that. And you have the recording of last week that will be available to you. So you wouldn't really miss much. And last week we had Dewey Kern, who you may know about. He's one of the world's leading experts on bee biology, and that went really well. He actually managed to give his talk from Bolivia. And we're having Randy from California this weekend. So we're looking forward to that. And Jose, did you manage to get our lineup of guest speakers coming up?
I do have that ready, unless Paul wants to talk about that.
Paul, do you want to talk about that?
I defer to Jose.
Okay.
So I just want to mention that on February 3rd, we're going to have a talk on bumblebees, bumblebee basics with Heather Holm, and that will be very interesting. What I want to do actually is, I just posted in the chat the website for our upcoming events. If you click on that, if you go to our website and you click on that, you will see our full schedule. It's ctbees.org. And if you go to the events tab, you will see all of this information. In March, we have the USDA programs for pollinators. Izzy Hill from the USDA is going to be giving a talk. That's going to be very interesting. And in April, we have something called Honeybee Chemical Communication and Hygienic Behavior from Dr. Kara Wagner. And that will be really interesting. So I urge everybody to do that. And of course, make time to come to Bee Talks in between these talks.
Yeah, and since our schedule is published, we have two other guest speakers, Marianne Fraser from the University of Pennsylvania, and Jay Evans, the head of the USDA lab, is coming later on in the year. Those aren't posted on there, but they will be as soon as we get their bios and all of that. Our program chair works tirelessly at getting us some of the finest speakers we can find and afford. And so, and I think Jay will be a very interesting person for you to learn about how his research on Varroa. So it's really extraordinary. that we have those folks. And I'm going to be giving a talk also in June. I've been told by our program chair that I'm speaking on honeybee flight and sexual reproduction sometime in the.
You're gonna speak on whatever she tells you you're gonna speak.
Yeah, I gotta just, and the time and everything, I don't even have any choice in. So, so that's it. Bee Talks will be held regularly. And we're not going to, no matter what happens during the year, the events of the year, we have over 650 members in the club. We got to the point where we had almost 800 last year, and we expect that this is the early part of our season. We usually get, we will probably get another 50 or 100 beekeepers to join our club before the end of the year, which is so exciting for all of us on the board. And we hope that the more people that get interested in our club, the more we are going to offer for the beekeepers of Connecticut. So if you have some questions, send them to info@ctbees.org. If not, I'm going to close and say good night to everybody, and thanks for coming.